In the archives of the Second World War, there exists a shadowed ledger of secrets buried beneath the rubble of bombed cities, sealed in forgotten vaults, or scattered across seabeds where no diver dares descend. These are not the familiar stories of D-Day, Stalingrad, or the Blitz. They are the stories written in redacted lines, marked eyes only, then quietly suppressed, denied, and concealed for decades. The war did not only leave ruined landscapes and shattered nations, it left behind mysteries so sinister that they were deliberately erased from official history. Crates of cargo that vanished without explanation, sealed vaults hidden beneath camps of death, entire regiments swallowed by forests, and secret treaties struck in the ashes of a dying Reich. Each fragment that remains comes to us through torn documents, intercepted cables, and testimonies whispered under interrogation lamps. The files speak of operations without names, agreements never signed, and experiments that even hardened men swore never to describe. For every battle mapped in the textbooks, there is another battlefield hidden in silence, one where truth was bartered, erased, or chained away in forgotten basements. Tonight, we open those sealed files. Each revelation is drawn from what little escaped destruction. The scraps of reports smuggled from Gestapo drawers, OSS archives, Soviet dossiers, and declassified transcripts that governments once hoped would never surface. The deeper we dig, the darker the trail becomes. These are 4 mysteries of World War II, so sinister, so unspeakable, they were covered up forever. Chapter 1. The Vanishing Convoy of the Baltic. The final winter of the war, as the Reich clawed desperately at survival, a fleet slipped quietly from the port of Königsberg. The date was November 12, 1944. The air was brittle, the Baltic winds biting hard enough to flay skin, and the harbour cloaked itself in a fog so thick that even searchlights cut only narrow tunnels of light through the night. 6 German merchant vessels, each loaded with sealed containers under SS guard, formed the heart of Convoy T-234. Their escorts included the destroyer Z-38 and 2 torpedo boats, all under the command of Kapitän zur See Erich von Stutnitz. To ordinary eyes, it was a standard wartime transport, one of hundreds risking the gauntlet of Soviet submarines prowling those icy waters. But the manifests, later glimpsed in fragments from Gestapo File No. 17, hinted at something far from ordinary. The convoy carried Category Red cargo, a classification reserved for material deemed of absolute secrecy, reported to originate from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute's nuclear division. Witnesses in Königsberg, including dockworkers interviewed by Soviet investigators after the war, recalled that the containers were handled only by men in black SS uniforms, their insignia marked with the Totenkopf. No labels were visible, only stenciled codes beginning with the letters KRW. Some said the cargo gave off a faint hum, though whether this was the sound of machinery within, or simply dockside rumour, can never be known. Allied codebreakers in Bletchley Park intercepted encrypted transmissions referencing T-234. The decrypted fragments, catalogued as Ultra Intercept XC4729, revealed an urgency unusual for a routine supply movement. The convoy's progress was monitored hourly, relayed by shortwave bursts to Berlin, and noted with phrases such as "must arrive intact" and "no delays tolerated." Once at sea, T-234 maintained radio silence. The waters they crossed were lethal. The Soviet Navy had intensified its submarine campaign in the Baltic that autumn. The Red Banner. Baltic Fleet's Stuka-class subs lurked in patrol zones, while aircraft from airfields near Tallinn prowled the skies. Yet no recorded attack matched the convoy's disappearance. The last confirmed signal came at 03:17 hours, November 14th, a routine position report logged by Z-38. Then, silence. By November 15th, no ships reached their destination, and Berlin scrambled to determine their fate. Orders were issued for search patrols, yet the ICCs revealed no wreckage, no oil slicks, no bodies. An entire convoy had vanished into the cold waters without leaving the customary trace of destruction. British naval intelligence interrogated the few survivors. A small number of men from Z-38, found adrift near Bornholm, were captured by British destroyers and transported to Portsmouth. Their statements, preserved in transcripts stamped with the Official Secrets Act, painted an unsettling picture. They described a night of unnatural calm, followed by what one seaman called a tearing sound across the horizon, as if metal itself were being riven apart. He claimed the merchant vessel's lights blinked out one by one, not in the chaotic flash of torpedo strikes, but in sudden, simultaneous darkness. Then came the silence, and the destroyer itself was rocked by a violent wave before losing engine power. Hours later, it drifted alone, its charges gone. These testimonies, filed under document reference NID 1944 Baltic, were quickly suppressed. The British classified them not as routine POW interrogations, but as Category A, do not disclose. Even within naval intelligence, few were permitted access. Decades later, in 1996, when portions of the file were declassified, nearly every line of detail had been blacked out, leaving only a skeletal timeline. By then, the war's survivors were frail men in their 80s, their memories clouded, their voices ignored. The few who still spoke of the event referred to it as a ghost convoy. The Soviets, for their part, denied involvement. No patrol logs from the Red Banner Fleet indicated an engagement. NKVD officers interrogated submarine commanders after the war, and none admitted to sinking a convoy that night. If anything, Soviet archives revealed frustration at the disappearance, as Moscow had hoped to seize any advanced German cargo intact. A file from the Lubyanka, declassified briefly in the early 1990s before being resealed, described T-234 as a transport of atomic interest. The phrase has led historians to suspect that the convoy carried either uranium oxide, experimental reactor components, or possibly even documentation of the Reich's nuclear program. But if it reached the ocean floor, no one has confirmed its recovery. The mystery deepened in the 1980s, when NATO conducted underwater reconnaissance of the Baltic seabed. The project, codenamed SideScan, utilized advanced sonar to chart wrecks and geological anomalies. Reports indicate that in 1983, a series of non-identified structures were logged near the Gotland Deep. Among them, operators described elongated metallic shapes consistent with cargo hulls. But in the final published maps, these anomalies were absent. Insiders later claimed that political pressure forced their removal, with files relocated into sealed NATO archives marked strategic non-recovery zones. Whether the convoy lies there, entombed under silt, remains unanswered. The theories surrounding T-234 proliferated in the absence of hard evidence. Some argue that Soviet submarines did indeed intercept the convoy, but concealed their victory to mask the seizure of nuclear cargo, later funneled into their own atomic program under Beria's direction. Others believe the Germans themselves scuttled the convoy to prevent its capture, an act of desperation in the face of certain defeat. Yet the survivor testimonies complicate this, suggesting something far less conventional, an erasure rather than a destruction, a vanishing rather than a battle. One intelligence officer, quoted anonymously in a CIA memo dated 1952, remarked, "We have evidence of material that simply disappeared from the theater of war. Either it was retrieved by hands unseen, or it rests beneath waters no diver may ever reach." For decades, Baltic fishermen spoke of strange sonar echoes in the deep channels, nets torn without warning and compasses spinning as if caught in unseen currents. The Gotland Deep, where many suspect the convoy rests, is one of the most oxygen-deprived zones in the sea. Its waters are thick, poisonous, and nearly impenetrable. Any wreckage lying there would remain preserved, hidden in an underwater tomb. But official expeditions to locate the ships have been repeatedly denied or cut short, citing funding shortages or navigational hazards. Critics insist these denials serve only to ensure that the truth remains submerged. The vanishing convoy of the Baltic remains more than a mystery. It is a gap in the record, a silence in the archives that cannot be dismissed as chance. In a war that generated millions of documents, this one file remains almost entirely absent. 6 ships, hundreds of men, and cargo classified Category Red disappeared, leaving no trace but whispers. Each attempt to investigate has been met with censorship, denial, or silence. It is as if the sea itself conspired to erase them. And yet, the fragments that survive, intercepts, survivor accounts, and sonar reports, suggest something was carried in those holds that both sides deemed too dangerous to reveal. Something that was never meant to surface again. The truth remains locked beneath the waves, waiting for the day when silence is broken and the deep surrenders its dead. Chapter 2. The Cursed Vault. Beneath Buchenwald, when the gates of Buchenwald were thrown open by the US 6th Armored Division on April 11, 1945, the world's attention was immediately drawn to the skeletal survivors. The crematoria, and the grim evidence of systematic murder. But beyond the horror of the visible camp, there existed another layer, hidden beneath the soil, sealed with iron, and largely unknown even to many of the SS guards who had patrolled the grounds. This was the vault, buried beneath the southern sector of the camp, a chamber that official reports referenced only once, and then never again. What was discovered there in the spring of 1945 would vanish into the labyrinth of intelligence archives, smothered in redactions, guarded by silence, and marked as classified for decades. According to a declassified memorandum from the Counterintelligence Corps, catalogued as CIC 1945-1127, engineers assigned to secure the camp's infrastructure were ordered to survey its subterranean facilities. Beneath the ruins of a half-demolished administration block, they uncovered reinforced steel doors, the surfaces marked with SS runes and the insignia of Sonderkommando Einheit 57. This unit, long dismissed as a myth by post-war historians, had been rumoured to operate under the direct supervision of the SS Research and Teaching Association, conducting experimental work too secret to entrust to conventional medical or military branches. The doors were welded shut from the outside, as if designed not merely to secure the contents, but to ensure that nothing could emerge. On May 4, 1945, US Army engineers attempted forced entry. Using cutting torches, they managed to breach the outer barrier. Witnesses reported a wave of air escaping from the darkness, thick with the stench of chemical corrosion and decay. The soldiers prepared to advance further when orders arrived. Abrupt, unambiguous, and final. They were to seal the chamber, withdraw immediately, and await further instruction. The directive, stamped with both OSS and CIC insignia, was unusual in its urgency. "Do not proceed," it read. "Contents to be secured by higher authority." Within hours, the entrance was resealed with concrete and marked off limits. Whatever had been inside, American soldiers were not permitted to see it. The Soviets, however, were not deterred. By July 1945, Red Army units had taken control of Buchenwald. Months later, NKVD operatives reopened the chamber with explosives. Their after-action report, filed under NKVD Archive Reference B1137, described the interior as a vault of steel crates stacked with obsessive precision, each marked with the phrase Project Morgenrot, Morning Red. Some crates had been smashed, their contents burned in place. Others had been removed before the Soviets arrived. The remaining evidence, according to their account, included fragmented machinery, lead-shielded containers, and the charred bones of human remains scattered on the floor. The report speculated that the vault had been used for experiments involving radiation exposure, perhaps linked to uranium or thorium research conducted elsewhere in the Reich. Yet the most chilling detail came in a footnote. Some crates contained the residue of organic matter, unidentifiable, severely altered. No further explanation was provided. What became of the surviving materials remains an enigma. Testimonies collected decades later suggest that the NKVD transported select crates to Sverdlovsk, where Soviet weapons laboratories were already engaged in their own atomic and chemical projects, but no documents confirm their final destination. Soviet scientists interviewed after the Cold War spoke cautiously, claiming only that German experiments were reckless, uncontrolled, and too dangerous to continue. Some dismissed the Buchenwald vault as a storage site for contaminated waste, sealed to prevent leakage, yet whispers among survivors of the camp painted a darker picture. They recalled rumors of prisoners taken below, never to return, of screams muffled by the earth, of SS guards who refused to approach the southern wing at night. One survivor, interviewed in 1962, insisted, "Even the guards called it cursed. They said those who entered never came out unchanged." The Americans remained silent. When US officials were pressed during post-war trials, no mention of the vault was ever made. The Nuremberg proceedings catalogued countless crimes, yet this site, arguably one of the most damning, was conspicuously absent. Historians who later uncovered fragments of CIC 1945-1127 were met with redacted pages, entire paragraphs replaced by black ink. Requests for further disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act yielded little more than acknowledgement of the document's existence. The official explanation was that no additional records survived. But the timing of the orders in May 1945, the rapid sealing of the vault, and the handoff to Soviet forces suggest coordination. At the highest levels, a decision not to reveal what had been found. The physical description of the vault, remains consistent across the limited accounts that survive. It was reinforced with concrete and steel, its air heavy with chemical residue, its walls etched with runes and coded markings. The crates were sealed with bolts and wax, their contents leaking traces of radiation strong enough to cause Geiger counters to spike, according to one Soviet report. The suggestion that living prisoners were used in radiation experiments is supported by post-war testimony from former SS doctors, who admitted under interrogation that human experimentation with isotopes had been considered necessary for the defense of the Reich. One doctor, whose identity was concealed in US trial transcripts, claimed that Project Morning Red aimed to test the survivability of soldiers under atomic battlefield conditions. Whether this was truth, fabrication, or a desperate attempt at leniency, we may never know. But the most disturbing evidence comes not from the archives, but from survivor memory. In 1947, during hearings in Weimar, several former prisoners described being selected for special transport. They were taken toward the southern bloc, never to be seen again. One recalled a guard whispering that they were being sent to die in the red morning. Another spoke of a faint glow emanating from cracks in the floorboards above the vault, as if some unseen energy pulsed beneath. These testimonies were dismissed at the time as hallucinations of traumatized men, yet when viewed alongside the archival evidence, their words gain a terrible resonance. The vault beneath Buchenwald represents more than a physical chamber. It is a metaphor for the buried crimes of the war, the experiments so unspeakable that even victors chose silence over disclosure. Its existence suggests that the full extent of Nazi research remains unknown, its fragments scattered between Soviet laboratories, American archives, and the poisoned soil of Thuringia. The secrecy that followed its discovery raises questions that still resonate. What was hidden there? Why were Allied soldiers ordered away at the moment of discovery? Why did the Soviets find only ashes and fragments, when days earlier the chamber had been intact? And above all, why has every government involved chosen silence? Even today, excavations of Buchenwald's grounds avoid the southern bloc. Officially, the area is unstable, unsafe for digging. Unofficially, whispers persist that the ground itself is toxic, that strange readings still pulse beneath the surface. Some claim the vault was destroyed by the Soviets, flooded with concrete and chemical sealants. Others insist it still exists, its contents sealed in darkness, waiting. What is certain is this. In May 1945, beneath the ruins of Buchenwald, the victors of war stumbled upon something they could not, or would not, reveal. Something that even hardened soldiers and intelligence officers called cursed. And in the silence that followed, history itself was rewritten to forget. Chapter 3. Operation Iron Wolf's Forgotten Regiment on the maps of the Wehrmacht. General Staff, the 11th Regiment of the 9th Panzer Division, still exists in ink. Its last recorded movement orders are clear. Redeploy from Minsk to Smolensk, October 1943. The operation carried the codename Eisenwolf, Iron Wolf, and was intended as a routine repositioning of armor in preparation for counterattacks against the advancing Soviet front. Yet by October 28th, the regiment was gone. Not destroyed, not routed, not captured. Gone. No battlefield reports, no casualty figures, no Soviet claims of victory. 3,000 men, supported by armor and artillery, vanished into the dense forests of the Naliboki region. The forests themselves remain silent and endless. But the regiment is missing from history, swallowed by shadows where only fragments of testimony survive. The last reliable contact came on October 27, 1943. Radio transmissions confirmed the regiment began its march at dawn, heavy fog clinging to the ground, the chill of early winter settling into the trees. Witnesses in nearby villages recalled the rumble of panzer engines and the clatter of armoured columns moving westward. Then, silence. Wehrmacht High Command expected confirmation of arrival within 24 hours. None came. Couriers sent to locate the unit failed to return. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights over the forest showed only tree canopy. No signs of encampments, no wreckage, no columns on the march. What had become of an entire regiment? Captured Soviet documents from the First Belarusian Front, later declassified in 1967, provide no clarity. Their patrol logs note, absence of enemy armor in expected zone. NKVD internal memoranda dismiss rumors of a German defeat in the forest, stating bluntly, no engagement occurred. Regiment not encountered. The Red Army, notorious for boasting of enemy destruction, claimed nothing. For historians, this silence is more chilling than any recorded battle. If the regiment had been destroyed, the Soviets would have celebrated. If they had surrendered, Soviet propaganda would have broadcast it across Europe. Instead, the official stance was denial. The enemy had simply not been there. British intelligence, however, was paying close attention. In November 1943, an SOE cable intercepted in Stockholm reported whispers of an entire armoured regiment withdrawn from existence without trace. The cable, marked reference SOE NORD 3442, speculated that German units might be deserting, joining partisan formations, or disappearing into the chaos of the Eastern Front. But later, decrypts at Bletchley Park suggested something more disturbing. Encrypted German traffic, decoded weeks after the fact, revealed a terse exchange between Army Group Center and OKH headquarters in Berlin. Iron Wolf compromised. Regiment withdrawn from record. No further transmissions. The phrase "withdrawn from record" has haunted researchers ever since. Survivor testimony, though rare, exists. In 1948, a man claiming to be a former driver of the 9th Panzer appeared in Munich, presenting himself to American occupation authorities. His statement, filed under CIC Report D-1412, describes the regiment's final march. He recalled heavy fog, the oppressive silence of the forest, and the sense of being watched from the trees. Then came the order to halt. Officers spoke in hushed tones, radios crackled with interference, and compasses spun uselessly in their hands. Hours stretched into a day, then two. Men began to vanish from night patrols, their rifles left behind, no trace of struggle. Panic spread through the ranks. On the third night, the regiment's headquarters column was gone. Commanders, staff, and radio trucks. By morning, only scattered groups of soldiers remained. The driver fled, wandering until he reached German lines days later. His testimony was dismissed as delirium, the ramblings of a deserter, and filed away without further investigation. Other theories emerged from intelligence archives. A Soviet file uncovered in 1991, marked Special Projects Division, suggested the possibility of chemical field testing. Beria's NKVD oversaw clandestine research into psychotropic gases, intended to disorient and incapacitate enemy troops. Some historians argue that the forest became a testing ground, and the regiment its unwilling subjects. If so, the evidence was buried with the victims. Mass graves reportedly identified in aerial reconnaissance photographs by the CIA in 1952, located near the Naliboki marshes, were later dismissed as natural formations. Yet the photographs, preserved in declassified file CIA East 523, clearly show irregular trenches inconsistent with geological patterns. Whether they contained the remains of the 11th Regiment has never been confirmed. Another theory, whispered among surviving Wehrmacht officers, suggests defection. Some claim the regiment was absorbed into a clandestine Waffen-SS formation, its existence erased from official records to mask unauthorized operations. Documents captured in 1945 reference a phantom division, a mobile unit operating independently in Belarus, tasked with brutal reprisals against partisans. If true, the regiment did not vanish. It was reborn under new insignia, its former identity erased. But no insignia, no uniforms, and no prisoners ever surfaced to confirm this version. The Phantom Division remains as elusive as the men it was supposed to contain. The forest itself has played a role in sustaining the mystery. The Naliboki is vast, stretching across miles of swamp, thicket, and pine, where visibility is measured in feet and compasses falter under magnetic anomalies. Soviet partisan units operated there, emerging and disappearing like ghosts. It is conceivable that the regiment was lured into ambush, scattered, and annihilated piecemeal. But again, no records, no trophies, no battlefield. Just silence. The earth swallowed them, leaving nothing but questions. In the decades that followed, the legend of Operation Iron Wolf grew among locals. Peasants spoke of armored shapes buried beneath moss, of rusting helmets surfacing in spring floods, of strange metallic echoes when cattle hooves struck certain patches of ground. Hunters swore the forest was haunted, cursed by the ghosts of Germans who never left. In the Cold War years, Soviet patrols continued to report strange disturbances in the area. Equipment failures, compasses spinning, radios filled with static. Officially, the reports were dismissed. Unofficially, they were filed away under anomalous. To this day, no definitive evidence has surfaced. No graves unearthed, no wreckage recovered. The 11th Regiment of the 9th Panzer Division remains listed as missing in German records. Its disappearance was never mentioned at Nuremberg, never investigated by post-war commissions, never acknowledged by the Soviets. It exists only in scattered fragments. A driver's testimony, an intercepted cable, a blurred reconnaissance photograph. And in that silence, suspicion thrives. Were they victims of experimental weaponry? Were they erased by their own command? Or were they consumed by something the forest itself refuses to yield? Operation Iron Wolf's Forgotten Regiment stands as one of the strangest mysteries of the Eastern Front. Unlike other battles, its absence is its story. It is the gap where men should have been, the void where records end, the silence where voices stopped. It is a regiment not defeated, not victorious, but erased. And in that erasure lies a question no archive has yet dared to answer. How does an army make 3,000 men disappear? And why has the world agreed to forget? Chapter 4. The Forgotten Treaty of Kummersdorf in the final days of April 1945, when Berlin was collapsing under Soviet artillery and the Reich was breathing its last. The world was told that chaos reigned, that there was no order left, only the rubble of defeat. Yet within the ruins, a different kind of order was taking shape, an order not of armies, but of secrecy. At the Kummersdorf Proving Grounds, a sprawling complex south of Berlin, where the Reich had tested its deadliest weapons, a midnight meeting was convened. According to a misfiled OSS report later discovered in the US National Archives, under the classification Eyes Only, Truman, American and Soviet officers met face-to-face in the depths of a facility that had seen experiments with V-2 rocketry, nerve agents, and technologies never revealed to the public. What transpired there was not a surrender, nor an alliance, but something more chilling, a pact to silence, to erase, and to conceal. The report, coded OSS Cum 45-212, is sparse in detail but staggering in implication. It refers to a protocol of silence, allegedly drafted between representatives of the US 1st Armored Division and officers of the Soviet Third Shock Army. The purpose? To divide German scientific spoils and ensure that certain research never surfaced in any tribunal, trial, or press. The language is blunt. Materials pertaining to Anlage Süd shall be sealed, records destroyed, personnel divided by prior agreement. Anlage Süd, or Installation South, appears repeatedly in fragments of both Soviet and American documentation. Cross-references suggest it was a subterranean facility beneath Kummersdorf, used for testing advanced propulsion systems and chemical weapons. Its existence was long denied, but declassified fragments confirm it was flooded with chemical sealants in May 1945, deliberately erased from the surface of history. Marshal Georgy Zhukov's private logbook, a document that survived only in handwritten fragments released after the fall of the Soviet Union, complicates the story. In his entry for May 2, 1945, he notes, "Meeting concluded. Agreement unsatisfactory. Facility sealed. Prisoners unmentionable. Not to be discussed." The words "not to be discussed" are underlined twice, a rare emphasis in Zhukov's otherwise clinical notes. If Anlage Süd was sealed, why? If it contained prisoners, who were they? The official Soviet position after the war was that the site had been empty, destroyed by retreating Germans. Yet internal Stasi files from 1963, catalogued as MFS AOP 1663, describe an excavation attempt. The report details skeletal remains discovered chained to laboratory walls, their uniforms burned away, their bones scorched by unknown means. Alongside them, rusting prototypes were found. Metallic structures resembling engines, too corroded to function, too strange to classify. The Stasi sealed the site again, declaring it unusable and blaming the find on Nazi propaganda. For the Americans, silence was just as deliberate. The OSS file Eyes Only Truman was buried deep within classified holdings until 1978, when a clerk accidentally logged it into a declassification review. Within weeks, the file was recalled and resealed. Its few surviving pages make references to captured scientists extracted under paperclip authority and redacted shipments to Fort Bliss, White Sands, and Oak Ridge. The names are blacked out, but context suggests that some of Germany's most advanced engineers were divided between Soviet and American custody, not through chaotic battlefield captures, but through a negotiated exchange. The treaty ensured not transparency, but concealment. What the Allies agreed upon was not justice, but silence. The most unsettling detail lies in testimony gathered from former German personnel. In 1951, during an interrogation conducted in West Germany by the Gehlen organization, a former Kummersdorf technician described the flooding of Anlage Süd. He claimed that entire levels were submerged intentionally, with German staff still inside. "They told us the Russians would not find what we built," he said. "We sealed it with them." When pressed, he refused to elaborate, insisting only, it was not meant for war. It was meant for something else. His statement was filed, classified, and forgotten. Archaeological interest in Kummersdorf has persisted into modern times, yet access remains tightly controlled. Officially, the grounds are a restricted military zone, unsafe due to unexploded ordnance. Unofficially, researchers who attempted clandestine entry have reported strange anomalies. Collapsed tunnels, reinforced doors melted into slag, and air thick with chemical residue even 70 years later. Locals whisper of entire bunkers entombed in concrete, of train tunnels that vanish beneath the soil, of ghost lights flickering at night where the installation once breathed. Farmers who till nearby fields still find fragments of metal inscribed with codes, indecipherable and rusted, evidence of machinery that never entered production. The forgotten Treaty of Kummersdorf represents the darkest truth of the war's end, that the victors were not only fighting to defeat Nazism, but to inherit its secrets. It was not enough to win the war. They had to control its aftermath, to bury the knowledge that could destabilize a fragile post-war world. In doing so, they became gatekeepers of silence, custodians of research that should never have existed. The treaty, unsigned and unacknowledged, was designed not to end the war, but to conceal it. And in the silence that followed, the true cost of Kummersdorf was erased, not in rubble, but in redacted lines. Today, the name Anlage Süd remains absent from most histories of the Second World War. The OSS file remains sealed. The Stasi excavation report is hidden in archives in Berlin. Zhukov's diary, fragmented and disputed, is locked away by Russian authorities. The earth at Kummersdorf remains poisoned, off-limits, and unexplored. And so, the question endures. What could have been so dangerous that both superpowers, locked in an ideological death struggle, agreed to bury it forever? The answer, like the site itself, remains sealed beneath layers of concrete, chains, and silence. In the archives of war, silence often speaks louder than any document. We are left not with full reports, but with fragments, blurred photographs, redacted transcripts, whispered testimonies from men who swore never to speak again. The vanishing convoy of the Baltic, erased without wreckage or survivors. The cursed vault beneath Buchenwald, sealed and resealed by victors who could not bear the truth. Operation Iron Wolf's forgotten regiment, an entire unit swallowed by the forests of Belarus without trace. And the forgotten Treaty of Kummersdorf, where enemies became partners in concealment rather than rivals in war. These mysteries form not a history of victories and defeats, but of erasures, where the most dangerous truths were deliberately buried. Each thread suggests a world where the war never truly ended, where its darkest experiments were divided, hidden, and perhaps even continued in silence. The questions that remain are as haunting as the facts themselves. What was in the sealed crates? Who were the prisoners chained in subterranean labs? Why did thousands vanish into woods and seas without record? And above all, what did the victors see that compelled them to keep secrets not just from their enemies, but from their own people? The documents end in silence, the witnesses are gone, and the ground above these sites lies heavy, undisturbed. Yet history has a way of resurfacing, of breaking through soil and seawater alike. Perhaps one day, when the last classified page is forced into the light, we will finally see what was hidden. Until then, the silence endures.